You think you understand the universe because science gave you a number, right? But that number only tells you what happened, not why it happened, and Ibn Arabi says, the real crime of the modern mind is that it worships effects and ignores the hidden cause. Physics explains the effect. Sufism reveals the cause. Science looks at the movement of the universe after it already manifested. Sufism looks at the point before manifestation. Science catches the ripple. Sufism identifies the stone. Science measures the appearance. Sufism touches the root. That is the difference. Ibn Arabi says, the universe is not simply physical matter moving through empty space. The universe is the divine breathing existence into forms moment after moment after moment. Each atom is a sentence, each photon is a message, each quantum state is a vocabulary of intention. Physicists measure the results of this intention. They draw graphs, they write equations, they record outcomes on devices, but the knower, the Arif, does not just observe the pattern, he witnesses the author of the pattern, and this is where people get uncomfortable, because it means the world you are seeing is not an independent machine, it is a disclosure, a tajalli, projection of meaning from the unseen inner world into the seen outer world. You think things are moving because of force. Ibn Arabi says things move because of meaning. You think cause is mechanical. Ibn Arabi says cause is metaphysical. You think the universe is a clock. Ibn Arabi says, the universe is a mirror. Science is brilliant for what it does. Physics is magnificent for mapping behavior. But physics still studies the shadow, not the light that casts the shadow. Look at quantum mechanics. Look at probability fields. Look at wave functions collapsing when observed. Scientists discuss observation changes reality. But Ibn Arabi wrote 800 years ago, the world is shaped according to the perceiver. What you call interaction, he called witnessing. What you call information, he called unveiling. What you call entanglement, he called unity. Science is just now catching the tail. Sufism, the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, held the center. The cause has always been one, the forms are many, and if the forms confuse you, you remain trapped in effects. So the task of a human is not to become a scientist of matter, the task is to become a scientist of meaning, a reader of purpose, a decoder of signs, a knower of the source behind the pattern, because the day you understand why existence exists, not merely how it behaves, that day you do not just understand the universe. The universe understands itself through you. Science measures behavior. In the physical world, Ibn Arabi studies the intention behind that behavior in the unseen world, and if you look deeply into this single statement, it flips the modern paradigm upside down, because the modern human thinks reality is a chain of physical events pushed by mechanical forces, but Ibn Arabi says events are simply the visible signatures of invisible meanings, and every physical outcome is the last stage of a spiritual process, and Western science is only looking at the last stage. So, when a scientist studies gravity, he studies how objects attract each other, but he never studies why attraction was designed in the first place. When a physicist studies a photon, he measures wavelength and energy, but he never asks what hidden message that photon is delivering from the unseen realm. When a cosmologist studies the expansion of the universe, he calculates rate, he observes acceleration, but he never asks what intention is expanding it. And Ibn Arabi is saying the universe is not a machine that moves on its own. The universe is constantly being guided from the invisible domain into visible form, and this is the most shocking point, because in Sufism, causality is vertical, not horizontal. Modern science sees the world as chain reaction billiard balls colliding, but Ibn Arabi sees the world as meanings descending from the unseen and taking shape in the seen. So, in what science calls forces, Sufism calls codes. What science calls matter, Sufism calls crystallized meaning. What science calls laws, Sufism calls divine habits, and this is why the knower looks at the world differently. He doesn't just study motion, he studies intention behind motion. He doesn't just examine pattern, he examines the will that projects the pattern. He doesn't just calculate effect, he surrenders to cause, and that cause is the real, the one, the source of all emergence. But modern humans have been trained to believe only what their instruments detect, so they think microscopes and telescopes are the only gateways to truth. And Ibn Arabi says, the heart calibrated properly, a more powerful instrument than any machine created by human hands, because machines detect behavior, hearts detect meaning, machines see movement, hearts receive disclosure, machines observe forms, hearts witness origin. And the tragedy of modern education is that we have become excellent at measuring effects and completely illiterate in reading intention, so we have information without wisdom, data without understanding, metrics without vision. As a result, we know the mechanics of life, but we don't know the meaning of life. We know the function of existence, but not the purpose of existence. And this is why modern man is anxious, because he can calculate everything except why he is here, because purpose does not come from analysis, purpose comes from unveiling, and unveiling does not begin in the lab. Unveiling begins when the heart becomes receptive, when the inner noise is silenced, when the veil of ego breaks, when perception shifts from observing to witnessing. And Ibn Arabi says, the universe is not external to you, the universe is a mirror reflecting your level of consciousness. So, if you remain attached only to the physical layer, you remain trapped in effects, and if you break through the physical layer, you see that everything you measure is simply a shadow cast by a deeper reality. And the more science discovers, the more it will eventually be forced to admit that laws do not create themselves, equations do not write themselves, structures do not self-originate, meaning precedes measurement, intention precedes event, cause precedes effect. And this is the secret Ibn Arabi tries to gift humanity, but only few are willing to see, because people want proof, but the knower wants presence. The proof is in the effect, the presence is in the cause, and the cause is always closer than your breath. Yet humans remain devoted to the shadow, instead of turning toward the light that casts it. For science, reality, an external object. For Ibn Arabi, reality is a mirror reacting to the quality of the observer, and this one shift changes the entire architecture of how you exist, because modern science assumes that the universe is sitting out there as a neutral, independent system unaffected by who is looking at it. But Ibn Arabi says, no, the world you see is not the world itself. The world you see is a reflection filtered through the level of your consciousness. So, to people do not see the same universe, even if their eyes are looking at the same thing, because one heart is seeing with ego, and the other heart is witnessing with presence. And this is why Ibn Arabi said that forms are fixed, but meanings are personal, and reality is relational. Reality is participatory. Reality bends not to your thoughts, but to your state. This is why a saint sees mercy, where an arrogant man sees chaos. This is why a knower sees signs, where an ordinary man sees random events. This is why the prophet said the believer is the mirror of his brother, because the entire universe is one grand mirror, and what it reflects back is not the world, but the interior of the observer you bring your quality to reality. Then reality responds accordingly. That is the metaphysical core of Sufism, and now quantum physics is finally whispering the same thing. Observation collapses probability fields. Observation influences behavior of photons, electrons, and the subatomic world. But Ibn Arabi spoke that principle 800 years before the lab proved it. The world is not separate from the perceiver. The universe is not detached from you. Perception is not passive perception, it is an active participatory metaphysical act that shapes what can disclose itself through the moment. So in Western science, when a scientist looks through a lens, he believes he is simply discovering what is already there. But in Sufism, when a witness looks at a moment, he is co-creating the kind of manifestation that moment can reveal. Because you do not see life as it is, you see life as you are. This is why angry people live in a hostile universe, jealous people live in a threatening universe, victims live in a cruel universe, lovers live in a meaningful universe, not because the universe changed, but because their vibration, their inner tone, their state became the ruler by which they interpret every experience. And Ibn Arabi is saying the universe is not a static object, it is a dynamic responding mirror. And the real reveals to you not what reality is, but what level you are capable of witnessing. If your heart is covered by ego, you will see separation. If your heart is covered by fear, you will see limitation. If your heart is covered by greed, you will see scarcity. If your heart is covered by awe, you will see unity. And this is where science is stuck, because science refuses to accept the observer participates in reality. In a metaphysical sense, it accepts it in a mathematical sense in quantum mechanics, but refuses to admit the metaphysical implication that your consciousness is a field that interacts with the field of existence. Sufism starts from that point as the baseline. There is no reality without perceiver, there is no event without witness, there is no manifestation without a state, and this is why Ibn Arabi is not teaching you how to learn more information. He is teaching you how to transform your perception, because the perception is the transformation of world for you. Your internal modification is the external modification, because existence reflects you back to you. So the knower does not try to change the world, he changes his state, and the world changes as a byproduct. And this is the science of unveiling, not by studying the universe, but by calibrating the heart to the real, is that the mirror becomes clean and reflects the source instead of reflecting the ego, which is why Ibn Arabi says your world is nothing but the shape of your soul in motion. Physics tracks the pattern of the universe. Sufism traces the author of the pattern, and if you sit with this one line for more than 20 seconds, it destroys the entire foundation of mechanistic materialism, because modern science is extremely good at describing the what of reality. They draw equations that describe how gravity curves space-time, how electrons occupy probability clouds, how energy becomes matter, how matter becomes information. But all of these descriptions are pattern analysis. They are studying the footprints, while Ibn Arabi is looking at the foot that made the footprint. Science is obsessed with structure. Ibn Arabi obsessed with source. Science obsessed with the map. Ibn Arabi obsessed with the cartographer. Science wants to catalog creation. Ibn Arabi wants to know the one who breathes creation into existence moment by moment, because for the knower, the universe is not a self-moving chain of objects. It is a living script being written right now, and written again, now, and written again. Now every second is a fresh disclosure, every atom is a verse, every law of physics is a divine habit, not a mechanical necessity, and the knower does not worship the symmetry of the pattern. The knower witnesses the will that selects that symmetry in each moment. So for science, if you calculate correctly, you understand. For Ibn Arabi, if you witness correctly, you realize science thinks the laws are primary. Ibn Arabi says the lawgiver is primary. Science says the universe is a closed system governed by forces. Ibn Arabi says the universe is an open disclosure governed by intent that flows from the unseen into the seen, and the seen is only the crust, the rind, the outer peel of reality, like the crust on the bread, the hard skin on the fruit, the shell that conceals the living juice inside. And you can cut the crust 1,000 ways. You can measure it, you can draw diagrams, you can label variables, you can classify it with technical language, yet never taste the sweetness of the inner fruit, because you are stuck worshipping the outer layer. And this is why scientists reach complexity, not meaning, because complexity is the symptom, not the cause. Pattern is the evidence, not the author. That is why the more mathematically precise physics gets, the more metaphysically empty it feels, because a pattern without a source is like a sentence without a speaker, like art without an artist, like a melody without a composer. And the human soul rejects that absurdity, even if the intellect tries to accept it, because the soul knows that every design implies a designer, every rule implies a ruler, every message implies a messenger, every structure implies an intender. And science tries to avoid the source, because the source is not an equation, and science cannot tolerate what it cannot convert into an equation, so it worships the pattern instead of the source. It bows to the shadow instead of turning around to see the light that casts the shadow. And Ibn Arabi says the knower is the one who refuses to stop at the pattern. The knower pierces through the pattern into the cause, and therefore the knower does not become intoxicated by complexity. The knower does not become impressed by measurement. The knower does not become addicted to descriptive models. The knower wants the moment before the pattern emerges, the womb of existence, the divine command be that precedes manifestation. And when he traces pattern back to source, he understands that the most important part of reality is not the universe. The most important part is the one who brings the universe out of non-being into being, constantly, continuously, ceaselessly. And the scientist may measure the effect of that constant breathing of reality, but the knower bows to the breather himself. The more precisely science describes the how, the more Ibn Arabi forces you to question the why, because the difference between a scientist And a knower is not intelligence, it is orientation. The scientist is fascinated by mechanism, the knower is fascinated by motive. The scientist digs deeper into structure, the knower digs deeper into purpose. And the tragedy of the modern mind is that it thinks if you describe something with enough detail, you have explained it, but explanation is not meaning and description is not understanding, and Ibn Arabi is saying the how is the shadow of the why. The why is the parent, the how is the child, the how is the echo, the why is the voice, the how is the behavior, the why is the intention, the how is the pattern, the why is the purpose. And modern science does not ask purpose because it fears purpose, because purpose implies consciousness, because purpose implies direction, because purpose implies will, and will implies an intelligent source, and science is terrified of that implication, so it avoids the why. Like a plague, it hides inside mathematics, because mathematics gives the illusion of control. Mathematics is safe, because it gives the feeling that we can master the world. But Ibn Arabi says, the world is not meant to be mastered, the world is meant to be witnessed, not conquered, not controlled, but recognized as a disclosure of the One, because existence is not blind, existence is intentional. The universe is not random, the universe is written, it is not a system of accidental laws, it is a communication of meaning. Law is not a substance, law is a language, and you can memorize the grammar of the language yet never understand what the sentence is saying. This is exactly the problem of modern schooling. We have produced millions of students who know the formulas of nature, but not the purpose of nature, so they get lost in operational knowledge. Operational knowledge is a map, but the map is useless without direction. Every how is a what, every how is an effect, every how is the tail of a metaphysical chain, but the why is the head, it is the origin, it is the heart that pumps the blood of existence. Ibn Arabi is telling you that the universe is not only comprehensible, it is meaningful, and meaning is the foundation of being. So, if you only focus on the how, you miss the real, because the real is never inside the mechanism, the real is inside the motive. And when you live as someone who only cares about how, you become a technician of life, not a knower of life, not a witness of life. You become a mechanic, you fix the machine, but you do not understand the driver. And this is why there are scientists who know how DNA replicates, but do not know why they exist. Scientists who know how stars explode, but do not know why their heart is restless. Scientists who know how neurons fire, do not know why their soul feels empty, because the human hunger is not for functionality, the human hunger is for meaning, and the human problem is not lack of information, it is lack of orientation, and Ibn Arabi is trying to realign orientation to the origin, so he keeps piercing the why behind every moment, behind every breath, behind every motion, behind every law. He forces you to ask who benefits from this disclosure, who is being addressed by this experience, who is the listener of the universe. And this is why the knower is different, because the knower does not worship explanation, the knower worships the one who originates all explanation. And this is why the more you learn the how, the more you must be pushed toward the why, because the why is the portal that leads you to the real, not the echo, not the shadow, not the reflection, but the source that casts it all.